My son Oscar was certain I wouldn't get anything, not a cent. He didn't even look my way. He was convinced that Elsa's $70 million empire was now his. Every asset, every property, every legacy she had ever created. But when the lawyer read just one sentence, everything changed. The smile disappeared from Oscar's face and he began to scream so loudly that the walls of the office shook. 3 mornings earlier, I had no idea this would happen. I was standing in my kitchen, in the 2-story, 1-bedroom apartment on Oakwood Street that I had rented for the past 9 years. The air in the room was colder than it should have been. The faucet was making that soft metallic thump again, struggling to do its job. I had just poured myself a fresh cup of coffee when the handle of the mug cracked right where the glaze had worn off, and it slipped out of my hand. Hands. The hot liquid arced out onto my slippers and the yellowed linoleum, and the shards flew across the floor like shards of glass. I didn't even curse. At my age, accidents weren't anything dramatic. They were just another cleaning job. I bent down to mop up the puddle with a tattered tea towel, the same one with the faded red stripes that Elsa had once said made our kitchen look like a cheap eatery. Outside, the wind was blowing dry leaves across the concrete like old secrets, trying to find a place to hide. And just then, Frau Muller's voice came through the thin wall again. "Wilhelm, your sprinkler is leaking again. My roses are floating down the damn street." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. This irrigation system had been broken for months. But I hadn't fixed it. Not because I couldn't, but because some things just don't matter anymore when there's no one around who cares. I didn't yell back. I never did. I just kept wiping away the dirt and listening to the battery groan, wondering if this would be the winter when it finally gave up. Then the phone rang. It was an old corded phone, bolted to the wall, the one Elsa had insisted on installing when cordless phones were all the rage, claiming they were reliable in emergencies. The irony only dawned on me later. The first ring, the second, the fifth. I thought I wouldn't pick up the phone, assuming it was another call from the pharmacy about my cholesterol medication. But on the 6th ring, something inside me stirred. A strange heaviness. I stood up, wiped my hands, and answered. "It's Schmidt." A woman's voice answered. Clear, professional, emotionless. "Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt? This is Anna Kramer of Gottlieb und Meyer Legal. I'm calling about Mrs. Elsa Schmidt." My breath hitched for a moment. She's gone, isn't she?" "Yes, sir. She died Tuesday night. The funeral will be this Friday at 3 p.m. at the Heritage Garden Chapel. The will be read out in public after the service. You've been named as a beneficiary. Your presence is mandatory." I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the coffee-spattered floor as if it had suddenly become the most important thing I owned. "Are you sure?" I finally asked. "I haven't spoken to Elsa in over 18 years. She was very specific, Mr. Schmidt," the woman said softly. "Your full name, direct instructions. I believe she renewed her will about 8 months ago." I could almost hear Elsa's voice, precise, deliberate, controlled. If she wanted me there, it wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated move. I wrote down the address, thanked the woman, and hung up. The kitchen was quiet again, save for the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint sound of Frau Muller still muttering to herself outside. I looked at the photo magnetically attached to the refrigerator door, me, Elsa, and Oscar, taken in 1998 in Park Ridge. Elsa's smile was half-forced even then. Oscar, who was 7, was smiling, his arms around both of our legs, as if he still believed we were the whole world. And I looked useful, as if I had a purpose. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, and staring at the streetlight flickering above the sidewalk, as if trying to decide whether to keep shining or to give up forever. I remembered Elsa's voice, clear and calm, as she said to me on our last day. "You are a good man, Wilhelm. You just weren't made to keep up." She didn't raise her voice. She never did. She ended the marriage the way some people return books to the library, quietly, efficiently, overdue. And Oscar. He stayed with her. Of course he did. She had the house, the money, the future. And what did I have? A pension, a truck with a broken generator, and a list of stories no one else wanted to hear. That Friday came too quickly. The sky was overcast and blue-gray, the kind of weather that took my breath away. I put on the same dark gray suit I had worn to my sister's funeral 6 years ago. I polished my shoes until the cracks in the leather gleamed. I could go by car, but I don't. Wanted to come, needing jumper cables. The Heritage Garden Chapel sat on a hill above town, with ivy on the rocks and 2 fountains that hadn't been cleaned since last summer. The parking lot was filled with German cars and expensive suits. Everyone walked slowly, quietly, expensively. I walked inside and was immediately enveloped by the smell of lilies and cologne and wealth passed down from generation to generation. A few people looked at me, then quickly looked away, as if I were a puzzle they did not have the energy to figure out. I stayed on the back pew. The chapel was glass and polished wood, graceful and full of echoes. Elsa would have approved. She was always fond of beautiful places that did not need to announce their price. You simply knew. My son Oscar showed up late, about 25 minutes after the service began, with a couple of men in expensive suits on either side of him. They looked like they belonged to either a hedge fund or a private security firm. His hair was shorter now, his jaw tightened. But I recognized that stance from anywhere, a pose that his mother, Elsa, had perfected, where confidence was the default and doubt was a sign of weakness. He did not see me at first. Or perhaps he did, and chose not to. Either way, he walked right past my pew as if I did not exist. He took his place in the front row and folded his hands like royalty, awaiting tribute. The service began. A string quartet played something slow and serious. A woman in a string of pearls gave the eulogy, speaking of Elsa's achievements, her charitable ventures, and her brilliance. They talked about her legacy like she had already become a historical figure. But no one said her full name as I had always known it, Elsa Malina Klaus Schmidt, the young woman who once had a vintage sedan with a broken cassette player and believed that for A.M. was the perfect time to dream up a business plan. When it was over, people filed out in silence. I waited on the bench until the chapel was mostly empty. Then a tall, graceful woman whose hair was held back in a tight bun, making her look like a judge, approached me. "Mr. Schmidt?" she asked. "I am Anna Kramer. We spoke on the telephone. The will reading is scheduled in 25 minutes. Would you like to follow me?" I stood slowly. My knees were not what they used to be. "Lead the way," I said. As we stepped into the elevator, I caught one last look at the flower-covered altar. No photograph, no final message, just a simple brass plaque. Elsa Schmidt, 1965 to 2042. No epigraph, no explanation, just a name, a life, and the echo of what she left behind. The elevator moved more slowly than it should have. Everything in that building did. The lights glowed just a little too dim. The carpets muffled sound too perfectly. The hallways were too wide, too polished, too quiet, as if silence had been purchased and installed like a luxury finish. Anna Kramer did not speak as we ascended. She pressed the button with the same detached grace Elsa used to stir her coffee, efficient, precise, unbothered. I glanced sideways at her. She looked like someone born to deliver news no one wanted to hear. Pearl earrings, shoes without scuffs. Her posture did not allow for mistakes. "It will be just you and Mr. Schmidt," she said softly as the elevator doors opened to the top floor. "Mr. Oscar Schmidt has already made his way inside." Of course he had. He always arrived before me, even in childhood. Faster bicycle, better grades, sharper tongue. Oscar was never interested in beating the world. He only needed to beat me. She led me down a corridor lined with glass plaques on the walls, each commemorating an acquisition, a settlement, or a success, with framed signatures in black ink. Elsa's name was on half of them. Schmidt Consulting, ES Enterprises, Schmidt Strategic Trust. In each one, her signature curved with poise and pressure like she was always 2 steps ahead of the person reading it. Anna stopped in front of a tall wooden door and gestured. "Take your time." Then she disappeared like a well-dressed ghost. Inside, Oscar was already seated, his legs crossed, a wrist resting on his knee, fingers tapping his watch like time itself was running late. The lawyer, a man in his early 60s with silver temples and a voice like oiled hinges, stood as I entered. "Mr. Schmidt, it is good of you to join us. I suppose that depends on what is coming next," I said softly, easing into the leather chair that felt a bit too soft, a bit too forgiving. Oscar did not even look in my direction. He was focused on the stack of documents on the table, his eyes shining with cold calculation rather than any sign of sorrow. "We should begin," he said. "Not. Please. Not even. Are you ready?" Just that flat, sharp tone that made people move. The lawyer introduced himself as Klaus Richter, executive of Elsa's estate. "Mrs. Schmidt updated her final directives on April 5th of this year," he began, "and requested that the reading be done in person in the presence of both Mr. Oscar Schmidt and Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt. No exceptions." Oscar shifted, his mouth curled slightly. "She probably wanted to see you squirm one last time," he muttered. I did not answer. I had learned over the years that some provocations were not worth the dignity of a reply. Klaus opened the folder and began reading with the kind of practiced cadence that made wealth sound like ritual. "To my beloved son, Oscar Michael Schmidt, I leave the residence at Wielandstrasse 15, including all furnishings, art, and vehicles associated with the property. I also bequeath the sum of 600,000 euros, to be released within 1 month of probate." My son Oscar did not move at first, but I could see it. The tiny twitch near his eye, the sudden stillness that meant the numbers just weren't adding up. 600,000 euros. For his mother, Elsa, that was a minor detail. It was certainly not the whole empire. It was not the legacy he had built his entire identity around. He blinked once, then leaned forward. The lawyer, Klaus Richter, just turned the page. His voice didn't waver. "The remainder of Mrs. Schmidt's estate," he announced, "including the controlling interest in ES Enterprises, all primary investment accounts, real estate, intellectual assets, and a financial portfolio totaling approximately 70 million euros, is to be transferred in full to Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt." The room did not fall silent. It was already silent, but something inside it changed. The air thickened, the walls tightened. Oscar stared at the lawyer, as if he had misread something, as if he had pronounced a name incorrectly. As if it could not, should not be me. "I am sorry," he said slowly, the words sounding foreign to him. "Did you just tell him?" Klaus nodded. "Her wishes were documented, notarized, and confirmed. There are no conditions. Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt is the primary beneficiary of Mrs. Schmidt's estate." Oscar laughed. A single, sharp, cold sound. "This is a joke. A bad one." Klaus didn't flinch. "I assure you, Mr. Schmidt, it is not." "Well," Oscar snapped. "You do not assure me. You do not assure me of anything. This man was out of our lives for 18 years. He was irrelevant. She divorced him. She replaced him. He has no stake in what she built." "She disagreed," Klaus said evenly. Oscar's face twisted into something I hadn't seen in years. Something that looked almost like fear, but buried beneath too much arrogance to admit itself. "She was sick," he hissed. "She had to be. No one in their right mind would do this." Klaus removed a second envelope from the folder. Mrs. Schmidt anticipated this reaction. She asked that I read a letter aloud following the announcement of the will. "May I begin now?" "I don't want to hear it," Oscar snapped. "Then close your ears," I said, my voice low and steady. "Because I do." Klaus unfolded the letter. The pages were handwritten in Elsa's distinct cursive, sharp and slanted, the kind of penmanship that came from someone who never left words unfinished. He cleared his throat and began. "Wilhelm, if you are hearing this, it means I am no longer with you. It also means I have done something that might seem strange to you now, but I need you to place your faith in me one last time. You were not a flawless man. You lacked ambition. You were not flashy or exciting. You were never the sort of man who needed to be in the spotlight. But you were always dependable. You were kind. And you never asked for anything in return, not even after I had taken everything from you. I spent years convincing myself that success was the only thing worth building, that love was optional, that loyalty was a luxury. But you, Wilhelm, you never stopped being loyal, even when I did not deserve it. Oscar stood up, pacing now, his hands clenched, jaw grinding. Klaus's voice remained steady. Oscar, my son, you were raised in privilege. You were groomed to take over a throne, but you never learned how to build the kingdom beneath it. You inherited my ambition, but not the cost of it. And I fear that giving you more would destroy you, not empower you. Oscar turned to me, his eyes blazing. You did this. You tricked her. You got to her in her last days. I have not spoken to her, I said calmly. Not in over a decade. Exactly, he roared. So why you? Klaus spoke before I could. Because she said, and I quote, he's the only one who won't burn it all down just to prove he can. Oscar froze, his hands slowly curling into fists. His breathing was uneven now. This is not over, he whispered. I'll contest it. I'll drag it through every court in the country. You can try, Klaus said, finally closing the folder. But the documentation is airtight, with her mental competence verified, video-recorded testimony, and witnesses, one of whom is in this very building. Oscar's shoulders slumped, and for the first time in years he looked like a boy. Not a man, not a tycoon, not a successor, just a boy who had just realized his crown wasn't made of gold. It was only glass. He went off without another word. No farewell, no warning, just footsteps echoing down the polished hallway. After the door shut behind him, I did not move. I just sat, looking at nothing at all. 70 million euros. A company I had not seen in almost 2 decades. A legacy I had no desire to take on. I turned to Klaus. Why? He studied me, not unkindly. Because in the end, she loved you more than she loved the Empire. I couldn't speak. I did not know how. But deep down, I knew Elsa's final move was not revenge. It was not pity. It was a reckoning. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something I thought was lost long ago. I didn't head home right away. After Oscar left and the lawyer departed, leaving me with a folder full of numbers that did not feel real, I stayed in the room long after I should have. The light coming through the window blinds changed angles twice before I was able to get up. 70 million euros. Her company, her name on every ledger and boardroom door. And now mine. No, that word did not sit right. I did not build it. I did not even understand half of what she had done to make it what it was. Elsa had always been the architect. I was the foundation. Silent, unseen, the one thing everything else was supposed to rest on until she decided the view was better from somewhere higher. When I finally walked outside, the city looked different to me now. The streets, the cars, the familiar polluted air were all still the same. But everything felt distant, as if I were a visitor in a life that had moved on without me a long time ago. I took a bus back to Oakwood Street. The usual rusty bench was at my corner. The same gum was stuck under the plastic seat, but this time, people were watching me. News travels fast when it's just plain unbelievable. The idea that Wilhelm Schmidt, the quiet, gray-haired man who read old books in the park and paid for his frozen dinners with exact change, was now richer than the rest of the neighborhood put together, that was a story that people could not stop talking about. By the time I reached my door, there were already 3 messages blinking on my landline. I did not check them. I sat in the kitchen, same chair as always, the same radiator groaning behind me like it was warning me that even warmth had its limits. I stared at the folder Klaus had given me. My name was on the label. Thick paper, heavy. It looked like it belonged to someone else. Someone sharper, younger, more deserving. I opened it. Inside were documents that had names I could not even pronounce. Financial reports, certificates of ownership. A sealed letter was on top, marked Chairman onboarding. Urgent. I did not touch that one. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed the photo from my refrigerator door. It was us before everything fell apart. Elsa was in her dark coat, Oscar in his soccer uniform, and me with that look on my face I hardly remembered anymore, solid, grounded, like a man who knew his place in the world. But now, the ground was moving beneath me. The only thing I could feel was the immense weight of something I did not earn, and could not simply walk away from. Late that evening, there was a knock on my door. It was not a polite rap, but one that seemed to demand answers before I even opened it. I opened it slowly. Anna Kramer was standing there, a notepad in her hand, her coat still buttoned up. She had no umbrella, even though it was drizzling out. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded. "Do you always come this far just to see paperwork delivered?" She almost smiled. "Only when the papers themselves are powerful enough to shake the ground." She walked in like she had been there before. She looked around the room with the same expression Elsa used to get when we visited cheaper hotels, measured, reserved, silently critical. "We will need you to sign some papers tomorrow," she said. "A few immediate transitions and legal forms. You are now the controlling partner of ES Enterprises. The board will be notified on Monday. They will want to talk. They will want more than that," I said. "They will want a reason." "They already know the reason," she replied. "What they will want is reassurance that you are not going to destroy everything she created." Elsa never needed to be visible. I muttered. Elsa had power. Anna did not argue. She simply gave me a manila envelope. Inside is a statement Elsa wrote about a month ago. She asked for it to be released only once you accept it. It is to be published in the company's internal bulletin and given to the media. "Why?" I asked. "Because she knew," Anna said quietly. "She knew people would not believe it unless they heard it directly from her." I pulled the letter out of the envelope. This time the words were typed, but they were still unmistakably Elsa's, sharp and self-assured. You could practically hear her voice in the way she wrote. It started with, "To the team I built, and the people I trusted." Then it got to the point. "Leadership isn't about what you inherit, it's about the kind of person you are. I'm leaving my company to Wilhelm, not because of family ties or some old agreement, but because he understands the true cost of power and has never been a man to seek it out. That's the kind of guiding hand our future needs." I folded the page, its edges pressing into my skin. The words didn't feel like a compliment, they felt like a final judgment. Anna stood up. "The board's not going to like this," she said. "Oscar might sue. The newspapers are going to have a field day. Get ready to become someone you never planned on being." She left without saying anything else. The door closed behind her with a final sound, like a gavel hitting a block. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I just stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what Elsa had seen in me that I never saw in myself. The thing no one understood was that I didn't want any of this. I didn't want the money, the company, the title, or the power. I just wanted to be a man who was useful, reliable, and real. But now, the world had made a choice for me, and I had to decide if I was going to accept that role or just fade into the background again. The next morning, the local paper's headline hit me before I'd even had breakfast. "Ex-husband of late CEO named sole heir to €70 million empire." Beneath it was a black and white picture of Elsa, with that thin, unreadable smile she always wore for cameras. The picture made my heart ache. The online comments made me feel ill. They were filled with words like scandal, manipulation, and unfit. People who had never met me were already rewriting my life story to suit their narrative. Oscar gave a short interview, claiming the decision was a betrayal of the company's vision, and calling me a distant figure with no knowledge of the industry. He said Elsa's choice was Emotional, not strategic. The funny thing was, he wasn't wrong. It was absolutely emotional, but it was also a final decision. And a final decision carries a great deal of weight. That evening, I stared at myself in the mirror for a while. My gray hair was the same, my jawline was the same as it was in 1990, and my eyes were the same, except for a new look in them. It wasn't pride or fear, it was something older, a heavier sense of purpose. I was looking at a man who was getting ready not to run away, but also not to simply win. I buttoned my shirt, put on the only good tie I owned, and looked at the folder on the table. I picked it up because sometimes you can't carry a heavy weight unless you first accept that it's yours. The air in the lobby was chilly. It wasn't a cold kind of chilly, but the kind of cold that polished stone gives off when you feel like you don't belong there. The woman at the front desk didn't know me. Why would she? I hadn't been on the ground floor of this building since Elsa and I were still together. I waited while she made a hushed call, her eyes darting my way like she was worried she might need to call security. But then Anna appeared, looking perfect as usual. She wore a slate gray suit, a clipboard under her arm, and her face was blank. "Mr. Schmidt, this way," she said sharply. There was no friendly talk or comfort, just a sense of purpose. The elevator ride was quiet, broken only by the soft dings of the floors and the loud thumping of my own heart. The doors opened into a hallway of glass, steel, and a whole lot of tension. As we walked, heads turned. Whispers gathered in the corners like dust in a sunbeam. Some people stared, others looked away. Most just watched, like people do when a storm is coming in, but you don't know where it's going to hit. The boardroom was full when we got there. There were 12 people in all, 11 men in expensive suits and 1 woman with sharp eyes and even sharper cheekbones. Oscar was sitting at the far end of the table, looking like a king who had been temporarily dethroned and was wondering if his executioner was simply late or had decided to be kind. The chair at the head of the table, Elsa's chair, was empty. Anna pointed toward it, but I didn't sit down. Not yet. I stood next to the chair, with my hands on the back, just trying to feel steady. A man I did not know cleared his throat. "Are we ready to start?" Anna gave a brief nod. "As of this morning, Mr. Schmidt has been entered as the majority shareholder and controlling interest holder in ES Enterprises, following the final directives of Elsa Schmidt's will." A quiet murmur went around the table, a mix of disbelief and unease. Oscar still had not spoken, but the man beside him did. "Mr. Schmidt, you will forgive me, but with all due respect, we have our concerns about your readiness. This is not an honorary position." Elsa ran a tight ship. "She did," I said, my voice calm. But she also knew when to change her heading. The woman with the sharp cheekbones spoke next. "Do you intend to take over the day-to-day operations?" I paused for a moment. I plan to be aware of what is happening in every room that carries her name. That shifted the energy. The room did not relax, but it found a new balance. Power moves like that, invisible, subtle, and unsettling. Finally, Oscar spoke. "My mother made this decision while she was undergoing treatment. Her judgment was compromised." "Are you implying she was unfit to handle her affairs?" Anna asked, her tone edged with ice. "I am suggesting she was manipulated," Oscar snapped. "The timing, the secrecy, the way she trusted someone who did not want anything from her." I interrupted. "Someone who stayed out of the spotlight? Who didn't ask for favors or titles or an office with windows? Who loved her when she was still building this empire with calloused hands and sleepless nights? You don't manipulate someone by disappearing. You do it by lingering, which, as I remember, you've done quite well." His face flushed a deep red. The woman next to him whispered something under her breath, but he did not respond. The silence that followed was thick and sharp, like the air before lightning. I finally sat down. "I'm not here to disrupt," I said. "But I will not be dismissed. I don't want to run this company. I want to protect it. Protect what she built, what she believed in, what she named me guardian of. Not because of my skills, but because of my silence. Then whose image will you protect? Another board member asked, skeptical. Hers, I said, exactly as she asked me to. That ended the meeting for now. But as I stepped out into the hallway, I knew this was far from over. Power doesn't shift quietly. It makes noise. It creates fractures before it can find new ground. As Anna and I walked toward the elevator, she said, "That could have gone worse." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling that?" She smiled this time, faint but real. "I've seen hostile takeovers with more blood. But you've earned yourself a target, Mr. Schmidt. They will test you now. Every move, every breath. Let them," I said. "I've spent years invisible. Maybe it's time they saw me." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I opened the folder Elsa had left me. This time, I didn't stop at the letter. I read everything: balance sheets, employee rosters, memos she'd written in the margins, and notes to herself scribbled in sharp ink. And in the middle of all that cold financial language, I found something unexpected. It was a hand-drawn map of the new building wing she'd never lived to complete. It was labeled Wilhelm's Garden, a rooftop space with trees, benches, and a small pond, a place for employees to breathe. At the bottom, in her handwriting, was a note. "Some people lead by voice, others by presence. You were always the latter. Build this and maybe they'll understand." I traced the letters with my finger. I wasn't quite ready to cry, but I was too close to blink easily. I wasn't a leader. I wasn't a visionary. But maybe I was a promise. Not one that shouts, but one that stays. The next morning, I showed up at the office at 7:45. The front desk woman blinked when she saw me. This time I nodded. "Good morning," I said. "Mr. Schmidt. Franklin is fine." I took the elevator alone. I walked the corridors. I greeted people. I looked. I listened. And by noon I knew 3 things. Elsa's people were good, but they were exhausted. Oscar's influence hadn't disappeared, it had only gone underground. And the rooftop garden? It was already half-funded but completely forgotten. I made one decision that day. We would build the garden. Not for public relations, not for a legacy, but because Elsa asked, and because it would root me in something real. When I told Anna, she stared at me for a full 10 seconds. "That's what you want your first executive act to be." "It's what she wanted her last gift to become," I replied. "You'll be criticized," she said. "I'm used to that now," I said. "They'll say it's sentimental." "Good. Let them remember I'm still human." And so, Wilhelm Schmidt, the man no one expected, the man who once fixed leaky faucets in a condo too small for arguments, became the new face of ES Enterprises. Not because I fought for it, but because a woman who once left me behind had left me everything instead. The studio lights were hotter than they looked. It wasn't a bright heat, but a focused, intense kind that felt like judgment in the form of light. I fiddled with my tie again, something I had not worn in years, though Anna had been firm that I needed to look professional. I sat slowly in the chair labeled Guest, my hands folded in my lap, and waited. The host, a woman named Johanna Kessler, took a deep breath with perfect posture and prepared her sharper questions. She didn't bother with any pleasantries, just a nod and a glance at the countdown monitor. 5 seconds to go live. 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. "Welcome back to the Executive Edge," she began, turning to face the camera with that slick smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Tonight, we're joined by the man who's been making headlines across the business world this past week. Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt, former husband of the late Elsa Schmidt, and now, surprisingly, the sole inheritor of her €70 million estate and majority control of ES Enterprises. Mr. Schmidt, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me," I said, my voice coming out a little rougher than I wanted. I hadn't spoken much today, or this week for that matter. "Let's get straight to the point," she continued, her fingers intertwined like a chess player, ready for her opening move. You are not a businessman. You've never held a corporate title, and yet you now control one of the most influential boutique development firms on the East Coast. What makes you qualified to lead this company? I don't think I am, I replied simply. There was a moment of silence. You could hear it, and you could see the brief blink of surprise in Jordan's eyes. You don't think you're qualified? Not in the traditional sense, I said. I didn't graduate from Finch University. I don't play golf with venture capitalists. But I knew Elsa before ES Enterprises even existed. I knew her when she sketched designs on napkins and worried whether the bank would give her the loan. I watched her build this company from a kitchen table. And I know what she stood for. But that's personal history, Johanna countered, her voice quick and practiced. This is business. Investors want to see strategy, execution, and returns, not sentimentality. Strategy is important. I agreed. But so is memory. Legacy isn't just about buildings. It's about why they were built. And for whom. Elsa didn't create ES Enterprises to make stockholders richer. She did it because she believed beauty belonged in everyday life. She thought even affordable housing deserved architectural dignity. She made me promise I'd protect that spirit. That promise cost your son everything, Johanna said, twisting the knife with a gentle smile. Oscar Schmidt has publicly stated he believes your inheritance is the result of manipulation and emotional coercion. I did not flinch. Oscar believes he's owed something. But love isn't owed. Trust isn't owed. You earn it. And if Elsa believed I would do right by her legacy, then maybe she saw something in me he never bothered to look for. That's a heavy accusation. So is calling your mother's last will a mistake. The silence hung for a beat too long. Then Johanna changed the subject. There's been considerable public interest in your story. Some call it inspiring. Others are skeptical. You've become a symbol, Mr. Schmidt. What do you think you represent to people? I looked directly into the camera. I think I represent the quiet people, the ones who don't have titles or impressive resumes. The ones who've spent years doing the work that never makes headlines, fixing, supporting, staying. I think I represent the partners who were dismissed, the parents who were overlooked, the people who chose silence instead of the spotlight. And now maybe they see that being forgotten doesn't mean being powerless. Johanna's expression shifted just slightly. It was less polished now, less poised. You recently announced plans to build a rooftop garden at the top of ES Enterprises headquarters. Can you tell us about that? It was Elsa's idea. She drew it herself, called it Wilhelm's Garden, though she never showed it to me. She left the drawing in a folder with her final letter. I think she wanted the company to have a place where people could breathe, where beauty wasn't driven by profit. Some say it's a waste of resources, Johanna said, leaning in. Sentimental architecture. Not scalable. Not everything needs to scale, I answered. Some things need to be still. To be sacred. The lights didn't feel so hot anymore. I wasn't sweating. I wasn't shrinking. I was present. And the red light blinked off. Afterward, I walked out into the night. The wind was crisp, and the city pulsed around me like a giant, indifferent heart. I found Anna waiting by the curb, her arms folded. You went completely off script, she said. Did it matter? I asked. She thought for a moment. No, she finally conceded. It was better. By the next morning, the interview's effects were everywhere. It wasn't just the financial blogs or the shareholders who had plenty to say, but complete strangers. At the local bakery, a woman handed me my change and simply said, "Thanks for what you said about being forgotten." In the lobby, a janitor shook my hand, his eyes welling up. "She gave it to the right person," he whispered. The company's inbox was suddenly overflowing with personal notes, stories, memories, and messages from people writing about wives who had passed, husbands who had been overlooked, and children who had never offered a word of thanks. For the first time in memory, ES Enterprises' complaints inbox was full of humanity instead. Still, not everyone was pleased. The business section of the local chronicle ran an op-ed titled, "From Janitor to CEO, an Inheritance Fueled by Sentiment." Oscar posted a statement on social media, calling the rooftop garden a vanity project, born of grief and ego. He said I was turning a dying woman's last wish into a cheap branding stunt. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I took the article and taped it to my office wall, right next to Elsa's drawing. Because I knew that mockery, too, serves as a form of confirmation. And sometimes the louder they yell, the closer you've gotten to the truth. The board called for another meeting, though they framed it as a check-in, not a confrontation. I wore the same gray suit and tie, keeping my hands on the table, calloused and firm. I laid out the blueprints for the garden, detailing the budget and upkeep. This isn't just a rooftop, I explained. It's a reminder for every person who walks these hallways, wondering if their hours matter. If their work leaves a lasting mark, this will be the answer. I didn't stay to hear the vote. I already knew what it would be. Because the most radical act in a world obsessed with profit is to create something that has no price, something that simply exists. They had been expecting a complete overthrow. New faces in management, department heads sweating under new flowcharts, and a top-down restructuring that would see half the office carrying boxes by lunch. But I did not fire anyone. I did not hire a new CFO. I did not even change the art in the lobby. For the first 2 weeks, I did something far more unnerving. I just walked the floors, from desk to desk. I greeted every intern by name, and made sure to remember it. I brought the receptionist coffee and asked her how long she had been here. It turned out to be 20 years, 2 years longer than Oscar. She nearly cried when I asked about her daughter's graduation. At first, people froze when they saw me. Whispers in the elevators and awkward silence in the lunchrooms. Some thought I was trying to figure out who to get rid of. Others probably thought I was losing my mind. But by the 3rd week, something shifted. I became visible, not as a figure of authority, but in the way a slow sunrise is impossible to ignore. The board did not get it. They were polite, of course, too seasoned to scold, but they asked the same question in different suits. "What exactly is your strategy, Mr. Schmidt?" I would just smile, tilt my head slightly, and say, "I'm just listening." The confusion in their silence was clear. Listening wasn't on any quarterly report, but Elsa used to say that silence reveals a map. You just have to trace the lines, and I was tracing them. On Wednesdays, I started eating in the company cafeteria instead of the executive lounge. It was not a grand gesture, just a simple change, and people noticed. On Fridays, I'd sit in on project reviews without a word until someone finally turned and asked, "Do you have anything to add?" I usually didn't, but when I did, it mattered. Anna kept bringing me new proposals, messaging pivots, brand refreshes, and revised slogans. I kept saying no. "We don't need to change our outside," I told her. "We need to remember what's inside." One afternoon, I stood in what had been Elsa's corner office. It was mine by inheritance, but not by instinct. I ran my hands along the edge of her desk. I could still feel the faint dents in the wood where she had slammed her palm during a heated zoning dispute. I left them there. I did not want polish. I wanted proof. Then I picked up a small hammer and removed the door. I wanted everyone to see that the boundary between the inside and the outside was gone. A symbolic act, maybe, but symbols, like seeds, grow roots. Word got out. Not through a press release, but through whispers in the hallways. People started staying 5 minutes later just to finish an idea. Maintenance staff stopped flinching when the elevator opened. One of the junior architects, a young woman named Sabine, came into my office with a portfolio she said she hadn't dared to show under the old leadership. The designs were breathtaking, practical, warm, and affordable without looking cheap. "Why didn't you submit this before?" I asked. She shrugged. "I didn't think it fit the brand." I slid her folder across the desk. "From now on, this is the brand." Meanwhile, Oscar was circling. Not in the building, but in the background, anonymous leaks to architectural blogs, whispers of financial mismanagement, rumors about my health. I ignored most of it. But when he arranged a private lunch with 2 senior partners and tried to buy out their voting shares, I intervened quietly. I invited them to the rooftop, not to see the garden, which wasn't built yet, but to see the blueprint. I laid it out under the open sky, showed them Elsa's original sketch, and told them why she wanted it. "This isn't a vanity project," I said. "It's a compass. Every company needs one." They did not say much, but they stayed an hour past lunch. One even asked to keep a copy of the sketch. On the last Thursday of the month, I held the first all-hands meeting the company had seen in over a decade. There were no slides, no corporate anthem, just a room, a microphone, and a promise. "We're not changing our path," I said. "We're just making it clear. And I won't be here forever. But while I am, I want you to know Elsa didn't leave this company to me. She left it through me to you." You could hear the entire room take a breath at once. A collective breath told the employees they mattered. A week later, a note appeared on my desk. "You're not what we expected. Thank you for staying unexpected." I kept it in my wallet as proof that something inside the company had finally given way. Culture isn't a memo. It's a million small permissions to speak and to show that you matter. The positive shifts had begun to echo throughout the building. I knew the changes were real when the elevators no longer felt cold. When people laughed in the halls without lowering their voices. When an intern with a speech stammer led the Monday stand-up meeting. When someone pinned Elsa's garden sketch to the community board and wrote beneath it, "Coming soon." No one asked for permission. That was the whole point. But change, like gravity, pulls on things that want to stay put. And not everyone welcomed this new direction. One afternoon, I returned to my office to find the rooftop blueprint torn to shreds in my trash bin. There was no sign of forced entry or any camera evidence. Just jagged pieces of Elsa's sketch, ripped apart as if by teeth. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there for a while, collecting the pieces, smoothing the lines, and taping what I could back together. Some things, especially the most fragile, deserve to be made whole again, even if only by hand. Later that evening, I stayed late. The office was quiet in that rare hour between dusk and darkness when the building seems to breathe. I walked to the roof alone, a space of nothing but gravel, pipes, and the hum of electricity beneath the concrete. I closed my eyes and imagined it, her garden. I pictured a ring of lavender around the duct vents, benches facing the skyline, a narrow path of hand-laid brick, and in the center, a simple steel plaque etched with 6 words. "To rest is also to build." When I opened my eyes, the city blinked back, unmoved and unbothered. But I smiled because what the city didn't see was already taking root. They say storms don't announce themselves, but Oscars came in whispers. First, it was a subtle withdrawal of warmth, boardroom smiles that didn't quite meet the eyes, handshakes that loosened too soon, and hallway greetings that came a fraction too late. Then the delays began. Meeting invitations were accidentally missed, files went missing only when I requested them, and small system failures seemed to always circle back to something I had initiated. It was like watching a shadow lengthen at midday, slow, steady, and undeniable. The culture I had tried to nurture, rooted in clarity and respect, now felt like walking through a fog, thick, muffled, and cold. And Oscar? He was nowhere and everywhere. Too polished to confront directly, too strategic to be seen, just present enough to look innocent and distant enough to be untouchable. His weapon was not confrontation, it was erosion. It started with a blog post, a leak as they called it. An industry gossip site published a vague but cutting piece about a legacy firm losing its way under sentimental leadership. No names were mentioned, of course, but the language was unmistakable. An elderly interim with no prior corporate experience, and an emotionally driven project diverting essential resources. It spread through the firm like dye in water. First the marketing team, then client services, then finance. I heard whispers in the break room, questions about whether I had the stamina for this, about whether I was just playing caretaker until Oscar rightfully stepped in. I tried to meet it with transparency. I called a full team meeting, gave everyone the facts, the road map, and the reasoning behind every move. I even shared Elsa's letter with the board, hoping it would ground the mission in something deeper than just rumor. They nodded and smiled, but I could already see it in their posture. Doubt had taken root. Still, I showed up every morning at the same time, sitting in the same seat. That shared breath told the people they finally mattered. A week later, a small note appeared on my desk. "You're not who we thought you'd be. Thank you for staying that way." I put it in my wallet, not because it was praise, but because it was proof. Something had shifted. Corporate culture isn't a memo. It's a million tiny acts of permission to be heard, to be seen, to count. And those permissions were now spreading. I knew the change was real when the building's elevators no longer felt so sterile. When people in the hallways laughed without lowering their voices. When the intern who had a noticeable stammer led the Monday stand-up meeting. When someone pinned Elsa's garden sketch to the community board and wrote, "In progress," beneath it. Nobody asked for approval. And that was the whole point. But change, like a rising tide, tugs at the things that want to stay put. Not everyone was happy with the new direction. One afternoon, I came back to my office to find the rooftop blueprint torn into pieces in my trash can. No sign of a break-in, no cameras had been moved. Just jagged bits of Elsa's drawing, as if ripped by hand. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there, picking up the pieces, carefully smoothing the creases, and taping what I could back together. Some things, especially the most fragile, deserved to be made whole again, even if only by hand. Later that evening, I stayed late. The office was quiet in that rare hour between dusk and night when the building seems to breathe. I walked up to the rooftop alone, a space of only gravel, pipes, and the quiet hum of electricity under concrete. I closed my eyes and pictured it, her garden. I saw a ring of lavender around the vents, a couple of benches facing the city skyline, a narrow hand-laid brick path, and in the center, a simple steel plaque with 6 words. "To rest is also to build." When I opened my eyes, the city blinked back at me, unmoved and unaffected. But I smiled because what the city couldn't see was already taking root. They say a storm doesn't announce itself with a trumpet, but Oscars came in whispers. First, it was a subtle coolness, smiles in the boardroom that didn't reach the eyes, handshakes that ended too soon, and greetings in the hall that came just a moment too late. Then came the delays. Meeting invites were, accidentally, deleted. Files I needed would suddenly go missing. Small failures in the system that somehow always seemed to trace back to something I had initiated. It was like watching a shadow grow longer at noon, a slow, steady, and undeniable change. The culture I had tried to cultivate, rooted in clarity and respect, now felt like walking through a thick, cold, and muffled fog. And Oscar was everywhere and nowhere. Too polished to confront, too strategic to be seen. Just present enough to seem innocent, and distant enough to be untouchable. His weapon was not a direct attack, it was erosion. It started with a blog post, a leak, as they called it. An industry gossip site published a vague but cutting piece about a legacy firm losing its way under sentimental leadership. No names, of course, but the language was unmistakable. An elderly interim with no corporate experience. And an emotionally driven project diverting vital resources. The rumors spread through the firm like ink in water. First the marketing team, then client services, then finance. I heard whispers in the break room. Questions about whether I had the stamina for this, about whether I was just a caretaker until Oscar rightfully took over. I tried to counter with transparency. I called a full team meeting, gave everyone the facts and the road map, and explained the why behind every decision. I even shared Elsa's letter with the board, hoping it would ground our mission in something deeper than rumors. They nodded and smiled, but I could already see it in their posture. Doubt had taken hold. Still, I showed up every morning, at the same time, in the same seat. I walked the halls, not as a CEO, but as a gardener, a steward. I made no grand gestures. I didn't demand loyalty. I just kept showing up. I kept the rooftop sketch pinned to my wall. I had the first bricks for the perimeter garden delivered. I spoke to every team about purpose, not performance, and about growth, not just numbers. But even the best gardens need fences, and I had none. Oscar knew that, and he moved through the gaps like water finding cracks in stone. Then Anna got the email. It was a formal review request from HR, flagging her for ongoing unprofessional behavior and insubordination. My blood ran cold. Anna was the sharpest mind I had. She had championed the rooftop garden when no one else would. She had pushed through budgets, solved permit nightmares, and calmed investor concerns. She was my anchor in this storm. And now she was being accused anonymously of insubordination. I went to legal and demanded a review. The complaint was vague and untraceable. Policy requires us to take every concern seriously, they told me. I looked around the room and saw the same neutral faces I had once trusted. Now they looked away. Oscar had poisoned the well, and the entire firm was drinking from it. After that, the walls began to crumble. The young architect, Sabine, who drew up the rooftop plans, was gone. Reassigned to a development in Arizona. The receptionist who once greeted me by name now barely met my gaze. People avoided the elevator when I was in it. A quiet, practiced coldness settled in. Not hostility. Worse, indifference, as if I were already fading from the picture. And Oscar? He smiled at board meetings, asked thoughtful questions, and offered to step in, temporarily if I needed rest. A viper in a velvet coat. Then came the vote. A special board session to discuss long-term leadership continuity. That's what the email said, harmless on the surface. But everyone knew it was a vote to remove me and shift leadership back to someone with corporate lineage, as they so delicately phrased it. In other words, Oscar, the prodigal son, was returning to claim what he saw as rightfully his. I didn't argue. I didn't send out counter memos or try to rally support. I spent the night before the vote on the rooftop. It was just me, the sky, and the sound of the wind brushing the gravel where the benches would go. I walked the lines of the garden, my steps tracing what wasn't yet built. I whispered Elsa's name into the wind, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. She had given me this fight, and I had fought it not with swords, but with my presence, and sometimes that is enough. The next morning, I put on my suit, the gray wool, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and entered the boardroom as if it were a chapel. Oscar sat at the end of the table, his cufflinks gleaming, his posture perfect. The board trickled in quietly. No one looked at me. Anna sat to my right. Her face was calm, but her hand trembled slightly as she passed me the agenda. The chairman read the motion, a vote to evaluate and potentially reassign leadership. Oscar didn't make a speech. He didn't need one. His campaign had been in whispers and shadows and slow-burning sabotage. The chairman called the vote. All in favor? I looked around. Aye. Abstain. Nay. Aye. My heart beat slowly, like a pendulum counting down to irrelevance. 5-4. One vote left. It came from Lena Meyer, the youngest member of the board, soft-spoken and observant. She looked down at the table, then up at me. Her voice was steady. Nay. The motion failed. There was no applause, no sigh of relief, just silence. The kind of silence that says, "For now you live." I nodded once, stood up, and left the room without a word. Oscar's eyes never followed me. But I saw his hands twitch. Just once, a crack in the mask. But I knew better than to believe it was over. Men like Oscar don't burn bridges. They mind the foundations beneath them, waiting for the moment you cross. He wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Somewhere in a corner of this gleaming empire, he was already setting the next trap, quiet, patient, calculated. And as I stood once more beneath the bare beams of that unfinished rooftop garden, I realized I hadn't survived the storm. I was simply walking through its eye. The betrayal didn't arrive with a clap of thunder. It came as a forwarded email. No subject, no context, just a quiet storm disguised in clipped sentences and internal threads from someone on the board. There was no signature, just initials. But the language, I recognized it immediately. Precise, economical, smug in its certainty. Oscar. He had been feeding curated bits of information to external investors, whispering tales of instability, and weaving images of a company led by nostalgia instead of numbers. In those few lines, I saw the entire pattern of a campaign not to build something new, but to bury something sacred. He had pitched the rooftop garden as vanity, the mission as regression, and my leadership as sentimentality posing as vision. My stomach churned as I read, not from surprise but from clarity. The blade didn't sting because it was sharp. It stung because it was expected. Anna saw it too. When I showed her the email, her lips pressed into a line so tight it could have cut glass. "He's restructuring the board," she told me. "And the investors. One private conversation at a time." She wasn't wrong. Over the next week, I saw them pull back. Silent glances in meetings, conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Decisions were finalized before I was even briefed. It wasn't exile. It was a quiet reclassification. I had become a figurehead, harmless, just for show. I was the old ship's compass in the corner of the office, too revered to throw out, too outdated to steer by. That Friday night, I stayed at the office long after the lights went out. The city pulsed outside the windows. Red brake lights blurred into neon, and the distant murmur of late-night traffic hummed like a lullaby. I found myself on the rooftop once more. Cold wind scraped against the unfinished railings. The skeletal garden stood silent. Concrete planters lined the perimeter like empty urns, and the locked tool shed cast a long shadow. But there was something sacred in that silence. I walked the edges of the space, my palms brushing the rough stone. "Elsa," I whispered, though I didn't know why. Maybe to feel less alone. Maybe to ask her what I should do next. But no voice came. Just wind and a memory. The next morning, I arrived at an emergency strategy meeting. Oscar had scheduled it. The entire staff and board were present, with cameras and a live stream for key investors. It was all a performance. I knew it the moment I walked in. And Oscar? He stood there like a conductor at the head of an orchestra, ready to play my funeral march. His sleeves were rolled up, his charisma polished to a gleam. He paced slowly across the room. "This company," he began, his voice as soft as a sermon, "has always been about strength. But strength needs direction. And lately we've drifted." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. We owe it to our legacy not to get stuck in memory, but to move forward with courage. There were murmurs, nods, and a few claps, the kind that follow a suggestion, not a true belief. I didn't interrupt, didn't stand, didn't argue. This wasn't the room to fight him. Not yet. I walked out before the applause ended. Oscar's voice followed me into the hallway, talking about innovation and scalability. I didn't hear the rest. My heartbeat drowned it out. That rooftop garden, once a symbol of rebirth, now felt like a grave. That night, Anna came to my apartment. She didn't say a word, just gave me a look. She handed me a thick manila folder filled with financial reports, communications, and minutes from a closed-door subcommittee meeting to which I had never been invited. Oscar's fingerprints were everywhere. He had proposed a full corporate overhaul. My removal was hidden under the term streamlining. The rooftop garden would be paused indefinitely, with its funds reallocated to a performance fund to attract younger investors. My name would be changed to Advisor Emeritus. Not fired, just erased. We sat in silence for a long time. She stared at the fireplace. I stared at my own hands. The same hands Oscar once refused to hold when he was 12, because they were calloused and looked like a plumber's. I used to think he would grow out of it. Now I knew better. Then Anna said something I'll never forget. "You know he's afraid of you, right?" I turned to her. "If you were irrelevant," she said, "he wouldn't be doing all this." It landed like a stone dropped into still water. She was right. Oscar wasn't just trying to lead. He was trying to erase everything that proved he didn't build this alone. Especially me. So, I did something I hadn't done in months. I picked up the phone. Not to fight, but to prepare. I called Elsa's old estate attorney. I called HR. I called the one board member who had sat silent during the vote, Lena Meyer. I didn't ask for help. I asked for the truth. And piece by piece, the truth arrived. Oscar had already submitted paperwork to transfer several legacy trademarks. He had started talks to rebrand the entire firm. He had quietly fired 2 project managers who had once worked for Elsa. And the kicker, he had a private meeting scheduled for the following week with a foreign investor known for hostile takeovers. This wasn't a transition. It was a hostile takeover. That night, I went back to the rooftop again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Anna was already there, her sleeves rolled up, planting small rosemary starters into one of the planters. I figured if they're going to tear it down, she said, we might as well give it a soul before they do. I joined her, silent and focused. The cold air stung my fingertips, but the soil felt warm, alive. And as we planted, I remembered something Elsa had told me years ago, back when there was money, a firm, and before Oscar became a stranger. When you're not invited to the table, she said, don't flip it. Build your own. Set the place cards, light the candles, and wait. So that's what I did. I waited. The courtroom was colder than I'd remembered. Not in terms of temperature, though the central air was certainly running on overdrive, but in spirit. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, the kind that reminded you this wasn't about family anymore. This was about evidence, legalities, and the slow, precise extraction of the truth. Oscar sat 3 rows ahead of me with his legal team, a trio of polished men in expensive suits and matching binders. He never glanced back. He hadn't looked at me in weeks. His posture was perfect, his cufflinks gleamed. He believed he had already won. Judge Richter entered like a shadow, calm, slow, and completely unimpressed. She didn't care who Oscar's lawyers were or how many degrees they had. She only cared about order. As the session began, Oscar's lead counsel stood, his voice a condescending mix of civility and contempt. Your Honor, our position is straightforward. Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt has acted beyond the scope of his authority as defined by the restructuring memo dated February 14th. Furthermore, he has interfered with the transfer of assets that are crucial to the firm's financial reinvention. We request his immediate removal from the advisory board and the cancellation of all remaining executive privileges. They spoke as if I were already gone, a ghost wandering the office hallways. No longer a threat, just a formality to be completed. I stayed silent, my hands folded, eyes straight ahead. I'd let them finish their performance. I'd let them build their wall of words, because they had no idea what I had brought with me. Anna Kramer was the first to speak for our side. She approached the bench not as a lawyer, but as a witness, her expression clear, her manner calm and deliberate. Your Honor, she began, while it is true that Mr. Schmidt was given limited duties in the restructure, what was not disclosed in any of their filings is that several of those restructuring documents were signed by individuals who were no longer legally empowered to do so. She placed a folder on the table. Here are the timestamps, the email confirmations, and most importantly, a sealed copy of Mrs. Elsa Schmidt's posthumous amendment to her business will, one that was never submitted by Mr. Oscar Schmidt. There it was, the moment of change. A silence so profound it seemed to echo. Oscar's smile didn't vanish yet, but his shoulders stiffened. The judge raised an eyebrow. An amendment? She asked. Anna nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It was executed 1 month before her death and submitted to the family's estate attorney, then sealed per her instructions. The amendment specifically reassigns all voting shares to a trustee for a 5-year stewardship period. The named and notarized trustee is Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt. Now Oscar moved. He stood without waiting for permission. That's ridiculous. He spat. That document has never been filed. My mother would never. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Schmidt, sit down. He did, slowly, but I could see it now. The fracture behind his eyes. The beginning of his unraveling. The estate attorney, an older man with a cane and a voice like gravel, was next. He confirmed everything. I was instructed by Elsa to hold the amendment until a challenge occurred, he said, or until Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt requested it. She anticipated conflict. She prepared for it. He placed another folder on the table. Inside this are Elsa's handwritten notes, journal entries, and private memos, all detailing her concerns that her son might deviate from the firm's founding mission. Her words, not mine. For the first time, Oscar looked at me. Not with hate, not even anger, just confusion. The kind a child wears when they realize the fire they started has burned down the wrong house. I didn't look back. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My knees ached. My voice was quieter than I'd wanted, but it did not tremble. Your Honor, I said, Elsa and I built that company from nothing. I wasn't trying to hold on to power. I was trying to hold on to purpose. My son. I paused, swallowing the word. Oscar is smart. He's capable. But he's lost sight of what truly matters. The garden on the rooftop wasn't a distraction. It was a promise that no matter how high we built, we'd never forget to plant something beneath our feet. Elsa knew that. She built safeguards for it. I am only standing here today because she gave me the key. I sat down. The room was silent. The judge called for a recess. Oscar stormed out. I stayed seated. My palms were damp. My breathing was shallow. But inside, something uncoiled. Not victory, not yet, but something very close to peace. When the final decision came 2 days later, it arrived not with fanfare, but with formality. Judge Richter's ruling was clinical, precise, and utterly devastating to Oscar. The court recognized the authority of the amended business will, she announced. Effective immediately, Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt is restored to full trustee oversight for the 5-year stewardship period as defined. All attempted transfers, restructuring proposals, and brand initiatives proposed by Mr. Oscar Schmidt are hereby suspended pending an independent audit. Oscar didn't say a word, didn't scream. He simply stood slowly, collected his papers, and left the courtroom in the silence of a man who had finally seen his own reflection and found it wanting. I remained in my seat for a long time after the room had emptied. Anna sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. And in that quiet, I recalled Elsa's handwriting, looped and steady in the margin of the final page of her journal. If they forget the roots, remind them with flowers. That was exactly what I intended to do. They say a courtroom is where justice is delivered. But that's a lie. Justice doesn't live in a gavel strike or a neatly typed verdict. It lives in the quiet aftermath, in the look on a man's face when he realizes he's lost, not because someone took something from him, but because he never truly understood what he had. Oscar didn't show up at the office the next day, or the one after. His corner desk, the one he'd redesigned with brushed steel and frosted glass, sat empty. The chairs around it gathered dust. The air around it felt heavy, as if his ambition had burned too hot and left a void. I didn't gloat. I didn't even speak about it with the staff. There was nothing to say. Some losses teach faster than any lesson ever could. Anna and I spent the next few weeks restoring balance. There were documents to review and committees to meet, but most importantly, there were people to reassure. The employees who had been made to feel like cogs in Oscar's machine were brought back into the fold. I shook their hands, asked for their opinions, and listened. Not because it was good leadership, but because it was human. And it reminded me of the days Elsa and I started the whole thing from a tiny basement room with second-hand desks and a single window facing a brick wall. But the part that surprised everyone most wasn't in the boardroom. It was what I did with the rooftop. We didn't just finish the garden, we transformed it. I brought in local artists to create a mosaic path from pieces of broken ceramic from our past renovation mistakes. Students from the neighborhood planted herbs in repurposed wooden crates. We built benches from reclaimed beams, curved just enough to feel like an embrace. At the center, we placed a small plaque. Not a grand statue or a huge marble slab, just a simple line etched in bronze. Grow what matters. Remember what roots you. That garden became something more than anyone expected. Employees would go there to think, to cry, or to brainstorm. Clients would visit and sit in silence. Some brought tea. Some just stood by the rosemary and let the breeze carry their thoughts. We didn't host meetings there. No phones were allowed. It wasn't a place for making decisions. It was a place for remembering why we made them. One late afternoon, as a golden light streamed between the buildings like liquid warmth, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Oscar. No suit, no entourage, just him in jeans and a faded sweatshirt I hadn't seen since college. He looked thinner, not weak, just quieter. He didn't speak right away, his eyes moving over every planter, every small petal, as if he were seeing it all for the first time. I didn't get it, he finally said, his voice raw with an old regret, not anger. I thought you were holding me back. I thought if I didn't seize control, I'd have nothing. He paused. But I was already nothing. I held everything in my hands, and I still felt hollow, because none of it meant anything to me beyond a passing breeze. I said nothing, just nodded. He sat down beside me on the bench. You built this anyway, he murmured. Even after I tried to tear everything down. It wasn't for me, I said. It was for the ones who came after. He stared at the small plaque. Grow what matters. Remember what roots you, he whispered. Was that Elsa's line? No, I replied softly. That one was mine. We didn't talk much more. We didn't need to. Forgiveness doesn't arrive in big speeches. It comes with time, with just showing up, with the simple act of being there even when you're not sure if you're welcome. A month later, Oscar submitted a formal request. Not to return to the board, but to volunteer for the educational initiative Elsa had once envisioned, a foundation that offered mentorship to young entrepreneurs from underfunded schools. The board approved it unanimously. I didn't attend that vote. I was in the garden, pruning the lavender. As the months passed, life didn't become perfect, but it became real. I stopped thinking about legacy and started thinking about mornings. How the sun looked at 6:45. The sound the subway made when it pulled into the station. How Mrs. Barnett next door no longer yelled about the sprinklers because I had finally fixed it for good. And how sometimes the deepest peace is found not in what you earn, but in what you let go. Elsa's absence never stopped hurting, but it stopped paralyzing me. I'd talk to her sometimes while watering the rosemary, telling her about how the meetings went, how Oscar was doing, and how the wind had shifted that week. It didn't feel like talking to a ghost. It just felt like talking to the part of myself that still remembered what it was like to be held up by love. One evening, as dusk fell and the first city lights came on, a young employee I barely knew came up to me on the rooftop. She held a small sketch pad and a nervous smile. Can I show you something? She asked. I nodded. She opened the pad to drawings of the rooftop garden, of people sitting on the benches, of someone pruning the lavender. I come here a lot after hours, she said. This place, it saved me. I took the pad, gently flipping through the pages, each one drawn with such care. I looked up. Thank you, I said. No, she said. Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. She turned to leave but stopped at the stairs. You know, the story everyone talks about is how your son tried to take everything. But I think the real story is that you didn't let him take you. And with that, she was gone. The door closed behind her. The garden rustled in the breeze, and I smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because that single sentence was a door I hadn't even known I needed to walk through.